If you grew up in the 80s, 90s, or early 2000s, there is a good chance that dinosaurs were the first thing that ever genuinely astonished you. Before anything else in the natural world had a name you could pronounce, you already knew Tyrannosaurus. You knew Triceratops. You had the plastic figures, the picture books, the posters on the bedroom wall. And then came the films, the ones that made the ground shake and the jungle breathe, and the fascination became something deeper. Something that never quite left. But here is the thing about childhood knowledge, it freezes. The science did not. In the decades since most of us first fell in love with these animals, paleontology has rewritten almost everything we thought we knew. Some of what we believed was simply wrong. Some of it was close. And some of it turns out to have been more extraordinary than we ever imagined. This is what science has done to 10 of our favorites. Let's start with the one that started everything. Tyrannosaurus rex. The king. The animal that every museum placed in the center of the room, upright and thunderous, tail dragging on the floor like a living nightmare. For years it was thought to be a scavenging opportunist, too slow and too short-sighted to be a proper hunter. Today scientists know that T-Rex was almost certainly an active predator with exceptional vision and a sense of smell among the finest of any land animal alive in its time. Its posture, we now know, was horizontal rather than upright, more like a giant bird than a lurching monster. And many researchers believe its body was at least partially covered in proto-feathers. From the king to the one that cinema turned into a genius. Velociraptor. The animal that opened doors, that hunted in coordinated packs, that was roughly the size of a human being. Many people believed every word of it. Today scientists know that the real Velociraptor was the size of a turkey, weighed about 15 kilograms, and was fully feathered from head to tail. It was almost certainly intelligent for its time and capable of coordinated hunting, but what it hunted were small lizards and mammals, not terrified park visitors. Its fossil relatives are essentially the immediate ancestors of modern birds. Next comes Triceratops, which most of us remember perfectly, 3 horns, massive frill, the noble defender of the herd. The image holds up better than most. But for years it was thought the frill was purely defensive armor. Today scientists believe it was more likely a display structure, used for communication, mate attraction, and species recognition, possibly flushing with color in living animals. There is also the matter of Torosaurus, once considered a separate species. It is now thought by many researchers to represent a mature Triceratops, the frill changing shape dramatically as the animal aged. Brachiosaurus. The one standing at the window in the rain. The one that made everyone in the cinema fall completely silent. Many people believed it spent most of its time standing in shallow water to support its own weight, that its body was simply too massive for land. Today scientists know that Brachiosaurus was entirely terrestrial, moving through open forests on 4 pillar-like legs, its long neck reaching into the canopy the way a giraffe reaches into trees. Its nostrils were once placed on the top of the skull, but we now believe, based on soft tissue evidence, that they sat much lower on the face. Then there is Spinosaurus. For most of our childhoods, it was a footnote, a large predator whose bones had been destroyed in the Second World War and whose life remained largely a mystery. The films elevated it to monster status, upright, two-legged, the apex of everything terrifying. But the real Spinosaurus, as revealed by fossils discovered in Morocco in 2014, was something far stranger and more remarkable. It was semi-aquatic, built for water, with dense bones for ballast, short hind limbs, and a deep paddle-like tail for propulsion. It hunted fish in rivers the size of nothing alive today. Stegosaurus. The one with the plates. For years it was thought those plates were armor, a defensive shield against predators. That interpretation has largely been replaced by the understanding that the plates were almost certainly display structures, possibly capable of flushing with blood to signal temperature, mood, or reproductive state. The plates are too thin and too exposed to have functioned well as armor. And the brain of the Stegosaurus, famously described as the size of a walnut, was not quite that small, though it was still remarkably modest for an animal that stood over 4 meters tall. Pterodactyl, technically not a dinosaur at all, but a pterosaur, and a name most of us used as a catch-all for every flying reptile in existence. For years it was thought these animals were cold-blooded, clumsy on the ground, and essentially gliding on membrane stretched between elongated fingers. Today scientists know that pterosaurs were warm-blooded, covered in a form of hair like filaments, and moved on the ground with surprising efficiency. They launched by vaulting with their powerful forelimbs, not by running and leaping. Some of the largest could walk with their wingspan folded and their skull held upright. Ankylosaurus. The walking tank. Many people remembered it as a slow, lumbering creature whose only real strategy was to absorb punishment and occasionally swing its tail club in self-defense. That last part, at least, remains accurate. Evidence suggests the tail club was a genuine weapon, capable of delivering a blow powerful enough to fracture bone. But Ankylosaurus was not simply passive, it was a highly specialized animal whose armor, fused into the skin itself, represented millions of years of refinement. It also turns out to have had an unusually complex nasal passage, possibly used to regulate body temperature or produce vocalizations. Dilophosaurus. The one that spat venom at the man who tried to steal the embryos. There is no evidence that Dilophosaurus could spit venom of any kind. Nor did it have a retractable frill around its neck. What it did have were two distinctive parallel crests running along the top of its skull, almost certainly used for display, and a relatively slender, lightly built body. It was, in reality, one of the earliest large predators of the Jurassic, and a genuinely unusual animal. It simply did not need the venom. The truth was already interesting enough. And finally, Parasaurolophus. Not the most famous entry on this list, but for those who encountered it, in books, in museum halls, in the occasional film appearance, it left an impression. The long hollow crest. The question of what it was for. For years it was thought to be a snorkel, or an enhanced nasal passage. Today scientists believe it was almost certainly a resonating chamber, a biological instrument. Evidence suggests that Parasaurolophus produced deep, low-frequency calls that could carry across large distances. The forests of the late Cretaceous were, in all likelihood, filled with sound. The story of how we understand dinosaurs is, in many ways, the story of science itself, the steady, sometimes disruptive process of replacing what we thought we knew with something more accurate, more complicated, and usually more astonishing. The animals we grew up with have not disappeared. They have simply become more real. And perhaps that is the most honest kind of nostalgia. Not the kind that insists the past was better, but the kind that recognizes the past as the beginning of a much longer story. The plastic figures on the bedroom shelf are still there in memory. The museum halls still echo. But the animals that filled them have been revised, refined, and reimagined, and what has emerged from that process is not a loss. It is something considerably more alive.